A lot of people picture the 19th century West like the movies, a high noon showdown and a sheriff who fixes everything. But when you dig into the archives, town bulletins, court records, and newspapers, you get a different picture. Ambushes on the road, range wars, cattle going missing, bought and paid for politics, and people making the law with a lasso. Here you'll see 15 cases with proof on paper, on the record, that help explain why, in the U.S., freedom and order are still in tension to this day. Number 1. In the Old West, law and revenge went hand in hand. In 1878 in Wyoming, the outlaw George Big Nose Parrot became a target after a hit against the Union Pacific and the ambush that killed Deputy Robert Widowfield and Detective Henry Tip Vincent. In 1880, in a bar in Miles City, he drank too much, bragged, and was recognized. In Rawlins, he tried to escape on March 22, 1881, and attacked jailer Robert Rankin. The town pulled him out of jail and hung him from a telegraph pole. With no burial, the body ended up with doctors John Eugene Osborne and Thomas Magee, who tanned the skin and had shoes made. In 1893, Osborne was sworn in as governor wearing them. Today, they're at the Carbon County Museum in Rawlins. Number 2. In the summer of 1871, Abilene, Kansas, was a cattle town. Herds rolling in, saloons packed, and the law still kind of being made up as it went. John Wesley Hardin, an 18-year-old Texan, already had a reputation as a gunman and treated conflict like a quick trigger, fix. After drinking and gambling at the American House Hotel, he tried to sleep. In the room next door, rancher Charles Cougar was snoring non-stop. Hardin asked him to roll over. It didn't help. Instead of leaving the room, he pulled his gun and fired through the wall. One shot hit Cougar in the chest, and the noise stopped instantly. Knowing he'd broken the town rule against shooting, Hardin bailed out the window before Wild Bill Hickok got there. The story stuck because it shows how, in the West, a regular annoyance could turn into death. Number 3. In 1911, in Osage County, Oklahoma, Elmer McCurdy tried a train job that went wrong and only got him $46. On the getaway, the sheriff's posse cornered the guy. The shootout ended right there. With no family to claim the body, he ended up at a funeral home in Pawhuska. The mortician, Joseph L. Johnson, used arsenic to preserve him and charged coins to see the outlaw, like a roadside show. With nobody paying for a burial, the body became the funeral home's collateral. A carnival owner bought it and started showing it off for a nickel, changing the story depending on the crowd. Decades later, the body bounced around fairs and circuses and ended up hanging in a park in Long Beach, California. In 1976, on the set of The $6 Million Man, the mannequin broke and revealed bone. In 1977, they buried McCurdy in Guthrie under concrete. Number 4. The Bloody Benders. In Kansas, around 1871, a couple calling themselves John and Elvira Bender showed up with 2 young people, John Jr. and Kate, and opened a small store with a bed for overnight stays on a busy road. To folks passing through, it was just a pit stop, a meal and some conversation. But some travelers with cash, a good horse, or an expensive watch would disappear. The pattern, according to neighbors, was this. The guest sat in the seat of honor, with their back to a curtain. Kate kept the talk going with healing and spiritualism, while someone attacked from behind, and the body dropped through a trap door. In 1873, while searching for Dr. William York, a posse dug up the property and found several bodies, even a child's. When they came back to the house, the Benders were already gone without a trace. Number 5. Alfred Packer and the 5 Democrats. In the winter of 1873-74, in the San Juan Mountains in Colorado, a former soldier named Alfred Packer offered to guide 5 prospectors looking for gold. The group disappeared. Months later, Packer came back to Saguache alone, well-fed and spending money and items that belonged to the men. He swore they all starved in the snow, but his story changed with every question. The town went on alert, and the sheriff arrested him. Under pressure, Packer said there was a fight, that he killed all 5, and that he survived by eating parts of the bodies. In 1883, at the trial in Hinsdale County, Judge Melville B. Jerry cracked a bitter joke about the only Democrats in the area, and Packer ended up sentenced to decades in prison. Number 6. In the mid-19th century, the U.S. Army had a pretty out-there idea: bring camels in to haul cargo across the deserts of the Southwest. It worked for a while, but the project ended and some animals were left loose. Decades later, in 1880s Arizona, ranchers and cowboys started telling the same story: a dust-covered camel running around with something strapped to its back. Cattle would bolt in a panic. People got hurt. Fences went down. When they brought the animal down near Eagle Creek, the shock hit. In the straps, a dried-up body, like a mummy. A lot of folks tied it to the Camel Corps and the guide Haji Ali. Hi Jolly and the Red Ghost became a bar table story in the Old West. Number 7. In the late 19th century West, James Brown, Deacon Jim Miller, looked like a church-going man. Methodist, no drinking, no smoking, quiet voice, and a black coat. But behind that, he did hits for hire. He preferred ambushes, often with a shotgun, and left very little behind, so the total number of victims is still argued about today. One detail that spread by word of mouth: he wore a metal plate on his chest, able to stop bullets. In 1909, in Ada, Oklahoma, he was arrested for the killing of Allen Augustus, Gus Bobbitt, a former deputy U.S. Marshal. The folks in town didn't want to roll the dice with a jury. One night before dawn, they broke into the jail and hanged Miller in a barn. Frontier justice, cold and final. Number 8. Around 1870, at Palo Flechado Pass, in what was then the New Mexico Territory, Charles Kennedy ran a stop on the trail between Taos and Elizabethtown, the Gold E-Town. To people passing through, he was just another tough, quiet guy, with his Ute wife, Rosa, and a boy. But too many people vanished after supper and a bed for the night. One evening, a traveler mentioned Indians in the area. The kid, with no filter, blurted out that you could feel what his father was hiding under the floorboards. Minutes later, shots, people running, and Rosa went out into the cold to a saloon to get help. The group came back and found burned remains and a cellar that explained the disappearances on the road. The exact number of victims was never clear, and that uncertainty is what keeps the story alive. Number 9. In the middle of the gold rush, Levi Boon Helm from Kentucky became bar talk all over the West. Miners and travelers were crossing mountain ranges between California, Idaho, and Montana, and the boom towns barely had any law. When things went bad, the locals would throw together a vigilante committee. Helm followed the trails looking for work and gold, but he left behind fights, gunshots, and people who disappeared. Stranded in the snow on long trips, he'd tell it himself, half like bragging, half like a confession, that with no food, a buddy turns into rations, earning him the nickname the Kentucky Cannibal. In 1864, already mixed up in highway robbery, he fell into the hands of the Virginia City vigilantes. On the gallows, he didn't beg. He cracked jokes, shouted for Jefferson Davis, and jumped off the platform before the hangman even touched the rope, trying to stay in control to the very end. Number 10, Deadwood, 1876, a town of canvas and dust packed with miners, gamblers, and armed people. At Nuttall and Mann's, Wild Bill Hickok is playing poker without watching who's behind him. On the frontier, that's a mistake. Jack McCall, basically a nobody, walks up from behind and shoots him in the back of the head. The saloon goes quiet for a second, and then the crowd jumps him. A makeshift jury of miners lets him go, like the matter died right there. But the real law shows up later. McCall is caught, taken to Yankton, and hanged in 1877. When they opened the grave years later, what was left of the body sent a message. In the West, even a shot in the back comes with a bill. It's the kind of story some gray-haired guy at the bar tells, and everybody orders one more. Number 11, Julia Boulette. In January 1867, in the boomtown of Virginia City, Nevada, fueled by the silver of the Comstock lode, Julia was well known among miners and saloon owners. She made her living in brothels and also supported the local firefighters, who talked about her as one of us. One winter morning, they found Julia dead at home, and the city was in shock, especially since bar fights there were everyday stuff. Months later, they arrested a Frenchman named John Millane, also seen as Million, tied to some of her belongings, and the trial got straight to the point. Guilty and the gallows, with thousands watching. At the funeral, the procession packed the streets, like the town, for one day, admitted who helped keep it standing. Number 12, Reward Proof on the Frontier. In the West, between 1860 and 1880, when an outlaw fell into the hands of bounty hunters, getting paid depended on looking the sheriff in the eye and convincing him it was the right man. With no reliable documents and little infrastructure, some hunters went down a brutal path. They removed the head, packed it in salt, and carried it in supply sacks, like the flour bags from a general store. On horseback, over trails and dust, heat and rain could ruin everything. Animals and thieves could too. If it showed up unrecognizable, the sheriff could say, "Not good enough," and the reward turned into nothing. A lot of people figured it was easier than escorting a prisoner for hundreds of miles. And when the sack disappeared along the way, nobody knew who had died. And the story ended right there. Number 13. In Rawlins, Wyoming, in 1881, the outlaw George Parrot, Big Nose George, ended up on the gallows after getting mixed up in a train robbery. When the body fell into the hands of Dr. John Osborne and his assistant Thomas Maggie, they did something out of the ordinary. They preserved the skin from his face and made a mask. Old-timers said that on some Halloweens, the piece would show up at parties, getting passed around, and it would bring back the old story of the lynching on the telegraph pole. It was a message about the frontier, science, revenge, and curiosity all wrapped up together. Over time, the people who remembered the case started disappearing, and so did the mask, maybe burned, maybe forgotten in some basement, waiting for someone to find it. And the weirdest part is that almost nobody wrote it down. It stayed as bar talk. Number 14, the child tied to the Bender case. When folks remember that family, they almost always talk about the travelers who disappeared in Kansas. But behind that road and frontier story, there was a baby who ended up as just a statistic. After the cabin was abandoned, local men dug up the ground and, near the orchard, found the body of a little girl about 18 months old. There were no knife or bullet marks. Her neck was broken, like someone tried to silence crying in a hurry. Investigators at the time figured she might have come with a couple attacked on the trail. Her name never made it into the newspapers, only a number. And that silence still hits wrong. Back then, a lot of tough guys would rather change the subject and move on. Number 15. When the Civil War ended in 1865, the West became the place where a lot of people thought they could start over from scratch. Veterans, prospectors, and ranchers followed the trail of gold and grazing land, crossing the Mississippi and throwing up towns in a hurry. Saloon, poker table, cattle fights, and sometimes a duel on Main Street. But that was a short window. Between 1870 and 1890, the railroad stitched the country together, the telegraph shrank time, and the government showed up with deeds, a judge, a U.S. Marshal, and a land office. With barbed wire, the open range turned into fences and parcels. Then the gunman faded out, and the guy with signed papers moved in. When the 1890 census talked about a closed frontier, the myth was already fully set.